after going into the transfer portal last offseason and landing instant impact guys like Caleb Williams, Jordan Addison, Travis Dye, Eric Gentry, Mekhi Blackman, and others. Lincoln Riley and the Trojans did it again this offseason, and we may even see a better hit percentage on the transfers coming to USC in terms of turning into immediate starters or at worst number 2 players on the depth chart this fall. There are 12 transfers so far coming to USC. That number could grow when the window opens, but right now, looking at these 12 guys coming in, 11 of them will participate in spring ball. You're looking at a lot of potential starters. It's tough to pick right now where the bigger impact is on the offensive line or the defensive line. Starting on the offensive line, the Florida Gators provide 2 potential starters for USC this offseason as right tackle Michael Tarquin and left guard Ethan White are coming over to USC. White is the one transfer who is not at this point scheduled to participate in spring ball. USC has big openings on the offensive line. Andrew Voorhees and Brett Nealon, both first-team All-Americans last year, they are off to the NFL. Bobby Haskins, who started at left tackle for a bulk of the season, he's gone too. Justin Dedich, who played guard last year, likely sliding to center, and Jonah Monheim, who played right tackle, could be sliding to right guard. So you could get an entirely different setup along the offensive line in Tarquin, White, and Jarrett Kingston, who's coming down from Washington State, who played a lot of left tackle for the Cougars. You could have your 3 new starters along the offensive line for USC, and that's big for the Trojans, who had one of the best offensive lines in the nation last year, to bring in some veteran help, probably to start for the Trojans this fall. Staying on offense, Marshawn Lloyd comes over from South Carolina. Again, talking about Travis Dye last year. USC played without him as he got injured and Austin Jones stepped up. Marshawn Lloyd gives the Trojans another guy who could come in and be a first-year starter for the Trojans, Lloyd and Austin Jones. And then you have Raleek Brown in there too. That's a pretty dynamic backfield setup. It wouldn't be surprising if Lloyd, if he can overcome some of the injury issues that he's had, turns into the starter for USC. And then an Arizona transfer at wide receiver, Dorian Singer, who was one of 4 Pac-12 receivers to post 1,000-yard receiving years in 2022. An outstanding addition when you're talking about losing a dynamic player like Jordan Addison to the NFL. Singer can come in and do some of the stuff that Addison was able to provide for the USC offense. That is a big target for Caleb Williams, and a guy likely at worst USC's number 2 or 3 receiver, could be a real number 1 guy for USC in the fall. On defense, it starts with the defensive line. Anthony Lucas, a big-time young addition from Texas A&M, up on that defensive line. Keon Bars comes over right in the middle of that defensive line from Arizona. And Jack Sullivan, an intriguing transfer from Purdue, put up good numbers against the run for the Boilermakers defense last year, and that could be a key addition for USC. Those 3 guys will absolutely factor in potential starters, at worst number 2 guys probably at some of those positions up front for a defensive line that has to replace 22 tackles for loss and 13.5 sacks just from Tuli Tuipulotu, who's off to the NFL. USC needs big production. Anthony Lucas may be the guy with the biggest spotlight on him to see what he can do, again, as he comes over from Texas A&M to USC. It doesn't get easier for the USC defense in terms of finding replacements and needing guys to really step up to change some of the narrative that really grew about that USC defense last year. Tackling help, coverage help, everything that USC can get this offseason, they're looking for. Staying on that defensive line at rush end, Jamil Muhammad comes over from Georgia State, and he's an interesting addition. Lincoln Riley talked about him this offseason and said his pass rush ability kind of exploded off tape when the coaches watched him. So he's expected to be a big impact when it comes to rushing the passer, generating tackles for loss and plays in the backfield and things like that for USC. Again, that needs kind of all the playmaking help they can get on the defensive side of the ball. Right in the middle of the defense, Mason Cobb comes over from Oklahoma State. USC added Eric Gentry and Shane Lee. Shane Lee from Alabama, Gentry from Arizona State last offseason to help at inside linebacker. Mason Cobb had 96 tackles for Oklahoma State. He could end up being the guy at middle linebacker for USC. Will be really interesting to see how he fits in to the USC defense during spring, and if he can bring that elevated level of tackling and physical ability there at linebacker, that would be a huge addition for the defense. Going out to cornerback, another Arizona transfer, the third of three that came over from Arizona, and Christian Roland Wallace. USC has got to replace Mekhi Blackmon, who was phenomenal at cornerback in his 1 year at USC after coming over from Colorado. Is Christian Roland Wallace the guy? He has a ton of experience, a bunch of starts under his belt from his time with the Wildcats in Tucson. Can he be a guy that steps in right away and plays corner? USC brings back Damani Jackson and Jacoby Covington, two guys with not a ton of experience at corner, but big ceilings as big-time recruits previously. That's going to be a really interesting battle to watch at corner. But again, USC is not going after proven veteran guys to sit on the bench. Those guys the last year, and then expectations going into this year, those veterans that USC brings over, they have seen the field. So big things again expected from Roland Wallace. And then special teams gets a big boost from Eddie Czaplicki, who comes over from Arizona State. He was the first team all Pac-12 punter last year. USC struggled in the punt game, had kind of an interesting situation where they thought they were bringing a guy in, and he from Australia. Things didn't work out with that. They had to scramble early in fall camp and bring in somebody else. The numbers just weren't great in terms of punting. Czaplicki was phenomenal at Arizona State. The thought is that he could provide real answers at punting and also in terms of kickoffs, in terms of forcing more touchbacks when it comes to that. So USC potentially strengthening two special teams units with the addition of Czaplicki from Arizona State. It's a 12-man transfer class so far. Again, USC will probably work the transfer portal when that window opens in early May and more players come in. But right now, it looks like a class full of instant impact guys filling really important spots and big holes created by players leaving from the 2022 season.